we first got connected, we did a guest post for Lenny's newsletter. So all the product managers out there know what I'm talking about. And I think, Lenny had referred me to Maven, which was doing this kind of like first cohort for teachers over the summer. And you had fired back and said, listen, I took a sabbatical. It totally transformed my life. Whenever you launch this course, let's do an interview on it. So for 6 months later, I'm calling you back on that. So we got a chance to connect briefly, but thank you for taking the time.
Of course, I'm happy to be here. I love spreading this gospel.
So, and remind me, we need to talk about my course that's launching next month. We got lots to talk about with you, but feel free to interrupt. But so tell me, like, what's like the elevator pitch for taking a sabbatical? Like, what do you tell folks about it? What got you so excited to talk to me about it?
Yeah, I mean, very simply put, we live incredibly difficult, stressful lives in our work lives. There's always something to do. And we can benefit a lot from the creative break that you can take when you take time off. And so the benefit of a sabbatical and the reason to do it is, first of all, because you can, because you happen to be so lucky that you have a salary job where you're able to save some money and put it in the bank. And that is a new thing that people have never been able to do before, except for the very, very elite, like the 0.001%. Now it's like the 1% or the 5%. And so one of the reasons to take a sabbatical is because it's super fun, and you have the fortune to be able to do it. And why spend, you'll spend from 21 to 65. So spend 44 years just working. And before that, you'll have to spend all your time in school. So you'll spend 65 years of your life basically working, and your entire youth and time will just end up in this situation where you've not, where you've been working and you have never done anything other than work. And that's wild. I mean, take some time off and enjoy it. So that's one reason, enjoy life. The second reason is because I actually think it makes you a much better person, and better people live happier lives. Third is that I think that you will benefit from a work perspective. And I almost hate saying the third thing, but like, it's the only thing that convinces certain people. It's like, if you're a creative worker, you work in a creative industry of any sort, and almost all business executives are creative on some level. They have to be. Mm-hmm. I don't think there's anything that can be more creative. There's very few things that are as creatively consistent amongst creatives as taking months to years off and just doing a walkabout or a sabbatical. I mean, if you look at the biographies of, Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo or, Picasso or Steve Jobs, they've all taken sabbaticals, taken time to just, where they aren't producing whatever they're doing for months or years, honestly. And so it's a clear thread, particularly among the more interesting historical figures.
Yeah, no, I think that, to your point about being able to do so, in a sense, this is the first time we've been able to do so, right? People have savings, you can move between jobs with relative ease, a certain type of knowledge worker. And in a sense, leisure used to be the mark of success. I mean, you look a century, 2 centuries ago, being able to take time away from the city was how you knew you made it. Whereas now it feels like we've gotten turned upside down. The prevailing story, at least, that, you sleep 4 hours a night, you're Petraeus, you're Elon Musk, you sleep under the desk and never take time off. And so, especially, as you say, in the entrepreneurial field, but, folks working for companies have to be creative and have to be inspired, let alone have the health restoration to show up to work. So, yeah, it's like a new and an ancient thing.
Totally agreed.
So tell me about, give us like a broad perspective about your sabbatical. What did you do? How long did it take? And then I want to zoom back to kind of your life and what brought you to that point.
So I've taken multiple sabbaticals in my life. I didn't call them that until the most recent one, but the most recent one was 3 years by some definitions. I took 3 years between my last company and this one, where I was not drawing a salary of any sort and did not have a day-to-day job. In that 3 years, I spent 1.5 to 2 years fully off work, meaning I was not doing any sort of, and what does that mean? So no meetings that were related to finding what was next, no exploratory. I think I took one meeting, and that was with the CEO of Airbnb, Brian. So I think I took like one or two meetings throughout that entire time where it was like, oh, this is a potential opportunity. And then I realized that I didn't want to do any opportunity, no matter what it was. And so I just said no to the rest of them. It means taking time for yourself where you're the primary goal. And so I took, yeah, a year and a half, I would say, of core time when I was traveling. So what did I do during that time? I spent 6 months in Latin America, 6 months in Asia, and 6 months in Africa. And really tried to spend time getting to know local people in each of those geographies and building friendships, and uh, just sort of immersing myself in the world's riches.
Okay, and tell us about what was happening in your life before that that made you want to do that.
I was a startup founder. I spent all of my 20s starting companies. Started my first company, or I joined my first company when I was about 21, and then didn't stop until I was 30. And I took a few breaks. Like I said, I had a sabbatical in between Udemy and Sprig for about 3 months or so. But I was in a different place at that time, so I didn't take it very seriously. And so honestly, I spent 10 years basically in the startup grind, building companies. And my second startup didn't work out. It shut down. And shutting it down was an opportunity for me to go and do something different. And so I was lucky. I didn't have any other obligations, no family issues. My family was healthy. Didn't have. I was single, which was helpful. Certainly, you can do a sabbatical with a partner. I have a number of friends who did it over the last couple of years. You can even do one with kids. But I was in a situation that I think makes it even easier, which is I was single, um, and I was free of all obligation when I shut down my company.
Yeah, I mean, I want to talk a little bit about that earlier sabbatical. I know you'd mentioned it was tough when we spoke earlier, and you maybe didn't get as much out of it as you wanted to. I think that it's an important story because a lot of folks ask about, like, why do you need to take a class? Why do you need to talk to someone? Why do you need to get advice around taking a sabbatical? And just kind of curious what headspace you were in at that point and why you think it wasn't that effective.
Yeah, I think that I was pretty defeated. I took my first sabbatical the first 3 months after getting fired from my first company from my co-founder. So it was like a really, I was just depressed basically. And I didn't take advantage of the value of that free time. So I had 3 months where I did not have to do any work. I had been given 6 months severance, so I had plenty of money to afford that time. I didn't have any savings or anything, so that was the only money I had, was that severance. But um, and I spent 3 months. Uh, I spent 3 months basically just kind of sat, and I didn't take the opportunity that I think I could have to be intentional about what I did. And so I kind of squandered 3 to 6 months of time. I say 3 to 6 months because it's like 3 months. It depends on how you define a sabbatical, right? I didn't go back to a full-time job for 6 months, but I
Mm.
started doing some contract work after 3 months. That's why my numbers are always a little bit vague. But um, after 3 months, during that 3 months, I traveled a little bit, but I wasn't that intentional about it. And this is where I think, DJ, what you teach is useful. Is it's kind of useful to like know to set intentions and have some sense of what you're doing, and to meet other people who've done it so that it feels more normal, and to open up the creative mind of what is possible. And I mean, if you're going to go on sabbatical, I think it's just well worth a few $100 to make sure that you're like really doing it for the right reasons, and that you get what you want out of it. Because I didn't get a lot out of first. That was like probably my second sabbatical in life, or third, but I didn't get anything out of it.
Yeah. It's tough. I mean, the reason I brought it up and want to kind of underline it is that I was in a similar startup journey. So, a little bit different, but, we were 6 years in, and I was feeling burnt out and wanted to kind of take a step back. And I just didn't know the story of you can burn out from your dream job. I'd kind of heard the story of you burn out from long hours in banking or consulting. So it was just, I didn't know that what was happening to me. And B, I was kind of frustrated because I wasn't planning this epic sabbatical with my time off. Here I finally made it to get a chance to take off. So you had, 6 months severance, some kind of permission to explore something, but just the nature of burnout and all the emotions that go along with that make it tough to, actually do a good job planning and executing it. So definitely not your fault.
Yep, I agree.
So what, tell me about growing up and how you thought about work. So obviously it sounds like you're geared to be kind of type A entrepreneur, like one thing after another, like motivated by success. Where did that come from? And, how have you kind of challenged that over time?
Yeah, I grew up in an immigrant family that my dad, I think, very seriously made comments as I was growing up about how he walked multiple miles in the snow to his dishwashing job at the University of Wisconsin to pay for graduate school, and and came to the U.S. with, I think, again, he was telling the truth, like a few dollars, maybe a few hundred, I don't know, in his pocket, like no money at all, really. And I've been to my family's homes in India, and they're, we're lucky. We've done a lot better now, but when we were kids, it was definitely, you know, um, depending on your standards of third world living, it was third world living. It's not exactly the worst at all. We didn't live in slums, but it was tough. So I grew up with this mentality that one of my jobs was to work hard and get a good job so that I could sustain myself and not have to deal with the difficulties of my forefathers and or foremothers, as I recently added to this because um, it makes sense to add that. So I really feel like I grew up trying to get straight A's. I grew up working really hard. I was taught multiplication tables before I got to kindergarten. I was writing and reading before I got to school. I was in school, was always doing extracurriculars. I played competitive chess, and then I did speech and debate, and I played soccer and baseball, and I sucked at basketball, but I tried it for a little while. I could just try everything and was always doing something. In high school, it's probably the hardest working I've ever done. And that was in, uh, I was working like, probably slept like 4 to 6 hours a night, tops. Um,
Hmm.
and I was doing multiple extracurriculars, and then on top of that, doing a full course load and just generally working pretty hard. And uh and so I grew up just kind of used to working. And one of the things that I've always been lucky is my parents always made me travel. So we traveled as kids internationally to go visit our family in India. And then on the way, we'd go somewhere. We'd go to Europe on the way, or we'd go to Southeast Asia, or and those are the two main places we'd visit. And so we, I was exposed very early on to the idea of travel. When I was 13 years old, I spent 3 months in India alone. I was with my family, sorry, alone as in away from my parents. I was with family members, staying with my grandparents and staying with my aunts and uncles. But I was away from my parents for 3 full months. And so I was very well exposed to international travel as a child. So as I got older in my 20s, I think I always had this feeling that whenever I have a break, like time off, I would just go and go travel. So after college, I spent 4 months, 3 months really living abroad in Spain, teaching English. Which, by the way, I was dead broke during that time, so I had almost no money. And so you can travel and do a sabbatical with no money at all. Um, so that's kind of how my life was. I always took long breaks because I think I worked so hard that I would just naturally need to take a break.
Yeah. And it sounds like your parents were kind of supportive of this time off and things like that. You framed it from a perspective of travel, or is
Yeah,
this something you had to explain to folks?
actually, yeah, so I would say my dad was fairly skeptical, very skeptical, and not supportive, and my mom was very supportive. So I think it really depended on which parent. My parents split up, so at some point I was mostly raised by my mother, and my mother was very supportive. I think in part because I was working so hard and doing well in school. So I had that fortune. For people who don't have that or who are just being told to grind, I think the lesson that I've learned that's different from even my parents and anyone else is like for what, right? Like what is all of this hard work for? And
Mm.
I think when you really look at yourself in the mirror and ask yourself that question, um, the hard work, you have to enjoy yourself. Um, and that's a big part of, you know, what the hard work is for is it's to live a good, happy life. It's, you know, you're probably at the point now where your kid, it's not just for your kids. And that's why I think a sabbatical is so useful. It's when you've gotten to that level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs where you can enjoy yourself and have a good life. And that's been a perspective that I've really changed over time, that has been built. I did not have that perspective. And my mom and even my mother, who was supportive of me having a good life, herself has certainly a lot of trouble because of her challenges growing up and moving to America and stuff. So I think it's a new idea in my life, but it's made
Mm.
a big impact on me.
Yeah, I mean, in our earlier conversation, you'd said, that if you're not working, you're a better, more authentic version of yourself. Can you talk about that? I mean, a lot of people, I think their identity gets tied up with their work and job and who they are, and you obviously get this positive feedback and promotions and all that kind of stuff in that world. But how do you change in general when you're traveling or on sabbatical?
Well, work creates this background process in my mind that reduces my presence. So I find that when I'm working, I'm my brain, even when I'm not working, like even when I'm working, as in if I have a job at all or I'm working on a startup, even when I take time off, like go out to dinner with friends, go out for drinks, even if I
Mm.
take a 1 week vacation, my brain has this background process that is still processing. And I've gotten better and better at taking time off, but it doesn't change the fact that it's impossible to get it from, whatever, 30% probably all the time to like zero is impossible. I'm probably at like 20% now, 15%. When I'm on sabbatical, it's at zero. There is no background process. And that was such a revelation. Like, I don't know about you, DJ, but all my health issues went away. So I had TMJ. I had always had sort of sore shoulders. I was I had significant hangovers, and I'd actually stopped drinking for 6 months plus, and I was gaining weight, or I was actually having a lot of trouble keeping my weight, is what I would say. Um, and then when I went on sabbatical, I reversed all of these good health habits. I started drinking basically whenever the hell I felt like. I had taken 6 months off sugar. I off of processed sugar, and I started consuming sugar with reckless abandon. I ate whatever the hell was in front of me and did whatever I wanted, and uh, I had no stress feelings at all. Like my jaw never hurt. My shoulders were always fine. Like I had no repetitive stress injuries, and it just didn't matter what was going on. I didn't need to be super healthy and active. I was, of course, naturally I'm the type of guy who will go and hike and do other things. So I was active and walking around. But I also think stress is like, people always talk about like health being a combination of food and like your inputs of your body and your habits, like exercise. It's like, eating and exercise. It's like diet and exercise. No, it is diet, exercise, and stress. And
Yeah.
that is it. Like that last part is something people really forget. It's diet, exercise, and stress. So to the extent that you're, focused on diet, exercise, and stress, sabbaticals eliminate stress.
Yeah, that echoes in our research a lot. I mean, two things. One, having dozens of folks who had some sort of health issue, whether it was, IBS or trigger finger or other sorts of like stomach issues, ulcers, and just being kind of away and fully being able to let go of all your responsibilities and to do something nice and caring for yourself, right? Whether it's yoga or meditation or just be outside, move your body. um, and then on the flip side, what I hear a lot is folks that assume that their issues or their workaholism is just solely attributable to their job. So as soon as I take off, then everything's going to be great. And what they learn is that it's actually their mindset towards whatever they're doing that needs to change. So for myself, I did this like 6-week long walking pilgrimage, and like that's a totally insane.
Amazing. Where'd you do it?
It was in Japan on this island of Shikoku.
Very cool.
But
6 weeks.
it seemed totally rational at the time, but now I'm like, can you imagine just strapping on a backpack and walking 30 kilometers a day for 6 weeks?
I mean, I can imagine, but I get it. For most people, it's completely unimaginable.
Yeah.
Unimaginable.
And so it was like, it wasn't until 2/3 of the way through that I realized that I was, kind of competing with myself. How fast am I walking? When am I going to get finished? Did I visit this, and this, versus, experiencing it and being present. So, yeah, it's funny, those two sides of the coin of taking time off that could teach you.
Yeah, and I think it carries with you, honestly, as you, like, I think I am way calmer and more chill than I've ever been in my life, in every part of my life. And that has a lot to do with the fact that I took a couple of years to myself and really, fed my own soul for that time period.
Yeah, so let's talk about the sabbatical itself. What were your expectations going into it? What did you want to accomplish? And then, what did you do? How did it go?
So everything I say is going to sound completely structured because I am good at looking at patterns and structuring them and putting them into categories. My sabbatical was 100% seat of my pants, no idea what I was going to do next. Like, I did not have a plan at all. But a pattern emerged, which is nuts. So, like, a pattern emerged, and I saw the structure of what I did. So I'll tell you how it went down. I first took off, and in the first month or two, I went to Cuba. And I was in Cuba, and I was in this mode of I'm going to do whatever I want forever. Like, I'm going to have ultimate freedom. So every day I'd wake up and I'd go and do whatever I wanted in Havana. And then a couple days later, I'd have a bad day because Havana is an absolutely brutal place to live. I know people have been there for like 3 to 5 days and they say it's amazing. Like, try living there for a month. I don't believe you for a second. It is hard. It is a hard place. People are always trying to rip you off, always hassling you. You have no access to the outside world. Everyone you meet is super poor and is going to tell you about it, which is heart-wrenching. It's also heart fulfilling because it's good to know that this exists. This is like 90% of the world lives like that. But and so it's a heart-wrenching place. And so every once in a while I'd be like looking up flights at the at the hotel because that's the only place you can get internet. And pretty soon I realized, dude, if I just spend every 3 to 5 days looking up flights for the next couple of months, I'm never going to last. This is going to eat me alive. The uncertainty of what to do the next day was like really beating me up. And so I started to think about having some structure. I never structured it, but I started adding more and more structure over time. And so one of the decisions I made is that I was going to spend a month in one place. So I decided halfway through this time in Havana, I was like, Burning Man's in 3 weeks. I've signed up to be in a camp there. I'm going to take the next 2.5 weeks and I'm going to stay in Havana. And it was one of the best decisions I made. And I ended up doing that in 8 or 9 different places around the world, where I would just spend a month. I'd get an apartment. I would not stay in a hostel or a hotel. I'd get an apartment in a part of town where there are expats, because usually those are the part of towns that are slightly more accessible and easy. I think if you spend 6 months in a place, it's better not to live in a place where there are expats. But 1 month, it's nice to have some people who are used to foreigners and stuff like that. It depends. So I'd spend 1 month usually in an expat community, but still with 90% locals, to be clear. So I wouldn't go to an expat community that was truly expat, but whatever. And then I'd just hang out and do things and try to make friends. And my goal was to make local friends, not expats and not foreign tourists, which is what most people do when they're traveling. They go backpacking You can't make friends with locals because you're backpacking and nobody wants to be friends with fucking backpacker. Like you're gonna leave in like 2 days for the next shiny object. Like nobody cares about you. So
Hmm.
you only make friends with other backpackers. I said I didn't want to do that. I'd already done that before in my life. So I took a month and I'd just stay in a place. And then I'd do my backpacking in between. So I was like roughly a month or two on, a month or two off, a month or two on, a month or two off. On being when I was staying in one place, off being roaming around, doing adventures, crazy stuff like your 6 weeks. And I didn't do 6 weeks. I usually did 10 to 12-day adventures, but I did a lot of 10-day, 12-day kind of adventures like that. And slowly over time, I made my way. And there was a little bit of a route. I'd started in Cuba and I decided, well, let me go to Latin America, which is nearby. So I spent a month in Medellin. And then I ended up traveling around, coming back to Medellin for another month, which was a common theme. Sometimes I'd go to a place multiple times for a month. Then I moved on to Asia 6 months later. So there's a lot that happened. Um, and then I spent 6 months in different Asian cities, half of which, like I said, is on. So I'm in Mumbai, Shanghai, or Seoul, and I lived there. I lived in, the French Concession. I lived in Bandra. I lived in, um, you know, uh, Gangnam. Actually, funny enough, just like right in the center. Um, and then I would spend 3 months traveling throughout Asia in between. And then I spent 6 months in Africa, 5 months in Africa. And I did the same thing 1 month in Nairobi, 1 month in Kigali, and then a bunch of time in between doing adventures. Um, I had a couple rules. Do you want me to stop or you want to cue the rules?
Yeah, go ahead. Let's hear them.
So none of these rules were written down, but I had verbalized them. One was I wanted to lose myself. Rules or goals. I wanted to lose myself. That was an important. I wanted to just like be lost. I wanted to be in the middle of nowhere and feel like I had nothing. And just like that, I was a totally different person. I wanted to go all the way to the bottom of what I could go to. And I did that, I think, very successfully. The second thing is I wanted the majority of my friends to be locals and then at least 50% of my friends. So I told DJ, like, excluding any sort of romantic entanglements, of my friends to be, women. So I had a pretty diverse friends group while I was traveling, which was really nice. And then I also set an intention of never doing any work. So I didn't do anything that felt like work. Um, and I had an intention to get a broad-based understanding of the world's people. So I chose destinations based on their representation of areas that I did not know well. So
Hmm.
I'd already spent a bunch of time in Europe and Australia, which is why they were not on my list. And other than that, I visited places that I hadn't spent a lot of time in, and I really dove deep to get to know people in those areas. So those were the things that guided me.
That's awesome. I mean, you had talked about wanting to lose yourself. Like, what was it that you were wanting to lose, or what was it you were wanting to find by doing so?
I wasn't really trying to get rid of anything about myself. Like I liked myself. It wasn't like a depression, like, oh my God, I want to be like, it was more meditative and Buddhist in its thinking.
Hmm.
I wanted to lose myself in the sense that I wanted to like I wanted to just like, it wasn't that thought out of an idea. So you're asking me, and I like don't have a better explanation than just I wanted to lose myself. And like to me, what that means, I guess, is like I wanted to just like go out in the world and forget, uh, and not forget in like a I had painful memories type of forget, but more like a forget. Like I wanted to be so present with whatever was in front of me that I was not thinking about my baggage of the past or my future. I was just thinking about now, and I was lost in the moment and just there. And I think that was an incredibly powerful intention because I mean that's why it took me 18 months, right? Like of true travel. Because it took a long time for me to sort of peel off layers of myself. And in that, the benefit was that I found way more about who I am and actually got more strongly convicted about myself and what I like about myself. And I think built a lot of confidence during that time.
Yeah, what are some of those
So
things? I mean, we one of the biggest outputs of sabbaticals for folks seems to be confidence. So, everything from feeling like they can step away from an identity and they'll be fine if they switch identities, or leave a job and find a new job. Like, what was it about that experience that built confidence for you?
Yeah. Um, I had identified myself entirely through my work output, and in some ways, it's very difficult not to because I live in. I mean, living in America, you have a natural. I know there's people from all over here, but if you are in America or if you live amongst people who care about work, I think Asian societies are like this. Your work is your identity, so other people identify you as work, and so you have that. I also just put a lot of effort into it. Udemy and Sprig were my soul for the time that I was doing those things, and they meant everything to me. And so being able to find myself outside of work made me appreciate myself because it was much less focused on like whether I was successful, which is a very, very vain and kind of not deep way of thinking about your oneself. And it allowed me to explore more about who I was outside of those types of more tangible and sort of like rote definitions of self. So I feel like I really got to know what was at my essence, what's like my playful vibe, what's my inner child, um what makes me really curious, what type of person am I going to show up as. And again, I didn't have conscious thoughts about these things too much. I mean, occasionally, if I was like hanging out with someone and we were, pontificating on this, maybe someone was asking me these questions while I was traveling. I like talking about stuff. I would answer in this way, but for the most part, I wasn't thinking about this. It's like pretty amazing, actually. I just discovered these things, and now in retrospect, I can say that.
And you talked about wanting to diversify who you spent time with, and spending more time with women is important. Is it Are those connected? Is it conversations with different types of people, or is it like you kind of experiencing life in different cultures that kind of open that up? What would you
Yeah,
attribute it?
yeah, the diversification was just on many levels. The one where area I didn't diversify as much as I would have liked is actually um, age. And in retrospect, I'm like, how didn't I think of that? But I didn't think of it at the time. So I wish I'd spent some time with some older people. I was very good about this, and some younger people. I definitely had friends as young as in their teens and 20s. And then as old as in their 50s or 60s, maybe. So I didn't do terribly there, but I didn't do amazingly well. But on other realms, like diverse from a ethnic perspective, from a financial perspective, and from a sex, gender perspective, I thought I did quite well. And it was not an explicit intention. Like, let's be clear. I mean, it was an explicit intention. Sorry, but it did not define every moment of my life. I wasn't like, oh my god, I need to go find some women friends. Like, that is, I think, pretty lame and very calculated. I was more just like putting myself in situations and more open to being friends with different types of people than I was used to. I wasn't going through my normal avenues. By traveling by nature, you do that. And then I told you about a bunch of stuff I did. Like when I was living somewhere and I was like, in Medellin, I studied Spanish. So if you're, if you're doing something during the daytime and you then have a day night weekend lifestyle, and the day night weekend lifestyle is a very particular lifestyle. When you're on sabbatical, you don't have a day night weekend lifestyle. Everything blends
Mm.
together. It's a continuous lifestyle. It's a free lifestyle. But if you want to make local friends, you can't be in freedom mode because local people are in their day night weekend lifestyles, and so they have a scheduled life to some extent. And so I would mirror the lives of locals, right? I would mirror their lives in that simple way. And that allowed me to make friends in the area. I would be very open to meeting lots of people in the beginning. And that opened me to finding people I thought were interesting, irrespective of their background. Um, and so that was a huge advantage for me or that is a huge advantage for me now because I feel like I can relate to people in a way that is more deep, and to a lot wider group of people. I think there's like this modern diversity thing that is just very, very shallow. It's like literally how many women do you have on your cap table, or how many women do you have at your company? And like, I think those are important metrics. Don't get me wrong. I get it. But dude, you can't get there by being shallow. You can't just like look at a spreadsheet and try to improve your diversity, because you'll always miss something then. What you really need to do is to be able to relate to a much wider group of people and increase the aperture of who you get along with and who you like spending time with. And I did that instead. And I think that that has like dramatically impacted my ability to get along with different types of people. And as a CEO, that's a really valuable skill, because you're going to want to hire the best person, irrespective of whether they're from, another country, or whether they have, they're male or female, or whether they're, in their 50s or in their 20s. Like, you want to be able to get along with a wide diversity of people. And I think that that really helped.
Yeah, I mean, I want to talk about the role that travel plays in that, but first, speaking of diversifying who you hung out with, you met Lizzie, your fiance, on your sabbatical. So I want to hear a little bit about
I
that. You had
did.
mentioned to me that and maybe I put words in your mouth, but that you don't think that you would have kind of met her, or you don't think that she would have liked someone like you if y'all had met in kind of like work mode. So I want to hear a
Yeah.
little bit about
I
that.
think I did. I think I did say that. So, but before that, just to get back, all of this is way more possible on sabbatical than not, because you're just, first of all, if you travel, you're naturally exposed to a much wider range of people. I mean, I would never have met, Africans if I didn't go to Africa. Like, I wouldn't have met, not that many. I mean, it's pretty, the percentage of Africans living nearby me is really low. Like, I wouldn't have met like Colombians. I run into a Colombian every once in a while in the States, but not there aren't, 10 million of them within spitting distance of me, as there were when I was in Medellin. I wouldn't have met Chinese people, especially native Chinese, not Chinese Americans. Again, Africans, not African Americans. So that is like a huge advantage of traveling that helps. And then, of course, you also have a lot more time. So you're literally like a full-time socialite. So I think that's really helpful. In terms of that, what happened was I became much more chill and more personable, I think, and I became better at like interacting with people. And I think when I'm working, I'm like kind of closed off. I don't like meeting new people. I'm just working hard, and I like to hang out with my comfort. Like, whenever I'm social, I'm in my comfort zone. And so that is a huge reason why I was able to meet Lizzie, because I had opened myself up to meeting new people. I was giving off a vibe that was much more chill and much more grounded. And I was frankly just a little bit more interesting at that time. And now I think I'm interesting now too. But I think before I had gone on a sabbatical, I was a lot less interesting. Before I had gone on a sabbatical, I was probably like a standard tech bro. I'd worked in tech forever. I'd grown up in the Bay Area. I was like focused on building companies, and I thought the companies I'd built were interesting, but still, it's just like a very stereotypical thing. And then, oh shit, you spent the last, when I met Lizzie, you spent the last year like in Latin America and in Asia, and now you're in Africa. And we met in Kigali, Rwanda. I mean, it's a pretty random place to meet, especially since she's from Ohio. I'm from California. So, um, and we met, and we were, I think that really was uh, only possible because I was in such a free and open mindset. And then, of course, we built a relationship, and now we both work really hard right now. I don't think we will forever, but we have this sort of natural inclination and shared interest in having balance in our lives. And I think that it's much easier to find a partner when you're in that moment where you're more open-minded on sabbatical than it is when you're not. At the same time, these things they find you, you don't find them. And so you can't go on a sabbatical to try to find a partner. That will never work. You'll almost certainly fail,
Hmm.
because the act of this is one of those weird, Buddhist meditative type of comments, but like the act of trying to do it is what guarantees your failure. It's like it's really unfortunate, but that's how the world works. The world is pretty fucked up that way. So like it's like by trying really hard to do something, oftentimes you sow the seeds of your disaster.
Okay, so we talked about kind of finding yourself, obviously a little bit about finding your partner, your better half. What role did taking the time off play into co-founding Maven? Did it change the type of idea that you had, or did it put you in a creative space, introduce you to folks? How did that play into it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's like a pretty common theme, and you know that I'm going to say this because I told you this beforehand, but there's a pretty common theme of people asking me like, "Oh, how did your sabbatical help what you're doing next?" And like, did you take time off? A lot of people will literally talk about my time off like, "Oh, and then he took 2 years to figure out what he was going to do next." It's like, what the fuck, dude? You really think I spent 2 years just thinking about what I was going to do next? No, I spent 2 years enjoying myself and traveling. And then actually I divided that up and gave myself another year to figure out what I was going to do next. So my short answer to you is nothing. Did absolutely nothing to help me with Maven. Help me come up with Maven. Like that's the whole point, right? Like that's
Mm.
like a pretty important philosophical point to me. At the same time, in a very roundabout way, in a way where I'm not intending for that outcome to happen, it opened me up to the idea that I would get back in education, something that I probably wouldn't have done otherwise, because I'm much more comfortable with myself and more I think I had a little bit of an identity about how I didn't want to be an ed tech entrepreneur and I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And being an entrepreneur
Mm.
is to me much more cool and interesting. And so I'm now an ed tech entrepreneur and I don't really care. I'm just going to work in education for the next decade if I get lucky enough that Maven works out and I can do it for a year, for 10 years or 20 years. Um, the other thing it helped with is that it opened my mind to all of the possibilities of what I could do. So I looked into uh, getting into politics. I looked into teaching, online courses. I looked into building a venture fund. I looked into becoming an author, and I was able to fully explore these things during that 1 year, really 1.5 years that you know, leading up to Maven, and that made me much more confident in my decision to do this. So I don't have existential questions anymore about why I'm doing Maven. I know. And I think that I don't ever question like, is this what I want to do? And this is what I'm built for? I mean, I've explored every possibility under the sun and I still ended up here. Like, wow, that's crazy.
Mm.
So I'm really, really happy with the decision. And I also think that Maven is built on the idea of fostering human connection for people in a course, and that was not how I thought about education prior to Maven. I did or to the sabbatical. I didn't think about education in a more community mindset because I didn't really. I got lucky. I had a community from where I grew up, and I never had to build new communities. And now I know what building a new community is kind of like and what that feeling's like. But again, these are all like, what if I really wanted to just end up as CEO of Maven, I probably could have gotten 80 to 90% of the way there in 6 months of no sabbatical, just, you know, figuring out what I wanted to build next. But that's not the point.
Yeah, no, I get this question a lot, which is I get the question of what is the shortest amount of time I can get the benefits from a sabbatical, which I think is, a symbol that they're totally like you're not doing it right if you're trying to maximize, the efficiency of taking time off. And then the second one is, um, like how can I use it to figure out what I want to do next? How can I get an ROI from work? And, to your point earlier about trying to find a partner, that stuff comes, but you can't kind of set out to say, I want to tackle, the 13 skills that I need to get me to the next level. This doesn't work that way.
Totally
Uh,
agreed.
so we had a kind of a question / comment in here just about, someone who's currently on sabbatical. So cheers, Nick, to your journey. Sounds like you'll have some things in common as far as immigrant
That's
upbringing and
awesome,
things like
Nick.
that.
I don't know that you can convince your family, and I just don't even bother. I mean, my mom and brother are definitely very supportive and kind of happy that I did it. So I'm lucky in that way. But my extended family had no idea. Like I went to my grandparents in India and I actually spent like a month in Mumbai instead of Delhi, which is where my family's from, Delhi. So I stayed away from my family and they were like, "What? You're gonna come to India and not spend time at home?" And of course I spent plenty of time at home and went to Delhi a lot. But the core way that I think about this is I don't need to convince people directly or have this argument with them. Like I'm just doing whatever the fuck I want and fuck you. Like I don't care whether or not you agree or not. I've gotten to the point with my family where I could do that, and I think that's a point you should that maybe you are at Tunic. And then trying to convince them to do it, I can only do it by doing. So I'm just going to be who I am. And then if people are curious, they'll ask me. If people want help with something, they'll ask me. And this is uh, the gift and the curse of having found my own path in life. Is the gift is that I found my own path. I'm really happy with it. The curse is that I wish I could convince everyone to see the light that I see, but I can't. And so I feel a lot of guilt that I have lived this, like I've lived through a sabbatical. I've gotten these experiences. I've built some companies, and I wish that I could share that wisdom with other people. And I kind of feel guilty that I have this benefit and no one else does. But you just can't. You can't do. That's the reality of how evolution and how economics and literally everything we know says that some percentage of people are going to get it and other percentage aren't, and it's usually like that's just life. And so I don't try to convince anyone that they should do a sabbatical. I just talk to people who already are thinking about it and kind of just nudge them a little bit further forward.
What's the advice? What are the ground rules that you tell folks when they're already thinking about it?
I think we talked about this in the beginning, but just don't do work. Like the most insanely frustrating thing to me is when I meet someone who's like, oh yeah, I'm on sabbatical. I'm figuring out what's next, right? I just talked about that. Or I'm on sabbatical. I'm going to go spend time meeting the smartest people in the world and find out what they're doing. And then I'm going to work on whatever they're doing. And like, what the hell? Like, dude, take time off. Like, just trust me, it's worth it. And if I know someone and I'm giving them that advice, I tell them that they should do that. But it's a message that is sometimes given in futility. I like I just said, I'm at peace with the fact that most people, they will never reach that level of inner sort of peace, because they are constantly turned on and affected by the need to build something or do something instead of just being with themselves. But the people who can be with themselves, that I know, all the people I know who've done something like this, are so much happier and so much more relaxed and chill. So that is what it is.
I know you'd also said kind of discourage people from backpacking, or like backpack as a bridge in between the things. Are there other things that you would have liked to have done, either on the backpacking front or spend a month someplace, or that you would do in a future sabbatical?
So I have no problem with backpacking, and I think that most people who go on sabbatical will backpack. If it's your first time traveling, that's how you should travel.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that it's like your first time traveling. Like it is the first time you are spending, more than a month away, and the most logical and easy and also the most productive probably thing to do is to go get a little bit of an understanding of what travel is like, to make friends on the road, etc., before you go to the next stage, which is living in a foreign country or a foreign place, which I think has a much more uh, rewarding sense of depth, but it lacks breadth. It's a very, very different experience. And so I don't think you want to do that until you've had a chance to see some of the world. And seeing some of the world feels like a good first step. So I think so I'm in favor of backpacking. I just think that there's a second step to it. In terms of your question, I'm sorry, I forgot it. Sometimes I give you another answer than the question you're asking. So what was it again?
No, it's good training for your political career that you cited against. I was asking what would be your next kind of 1 month stints, if you could do it
I would
over,
love
or
to
if you could do it again.
Yeah, I would love to spend time. I wish I'd spent more time in the Middle East, particularly in a truly deeply Muslim country, because that's an area of the world that I feel I have the least understanding of now. So my two the region that I know the least about is like Central Asia, Middle East, and Eastern Europe. Like other than that, I feel like I've visited like many parts of the world, maybe a little bit of North Africa in the central, that whole region, that region right there on the map is an area I feel like I don't know that much about, and I wish I spent
Mm-hmm.
more time with. So I'd probably spend a month in like Saudi Arabia and Riyadh, or in what's the other major city in Saudi Arabia? I can't remember, but Jeddah maybe is the name.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I do that. Another example of something that's interesting is spending a month in a place that's very, very poor and really living a life that is more low budget. I think that's really insightful and can be really helpful. I wish I had done some of that. I'd done that in Havana, and I feel like I had a very, very cheap life there. I was spending probably $20 a day, $30 a day. This is pretty affordable, including rent and food and everything. So that's actually like, you know, um, uh, $900 a month. I mean, that's pretty good. Um, but I pretty good as in not very good, obviously, if you live that like that life forever. But it's a good understanding, good thing to have in your belt to appreciate life. Um, so yeah, I would recommend living in poverty. I also think like one of the things I did well that I liked is that went on some adventures that are really difficult to do when you're working. So I spent 10 days going to the Brazilian Amazon, through 2 days there, 2 days back, and then 6 or 7 days there. I spent 10, same thing, 10 to 12 days, maybe 14 days going to Antarctica, 2 days there, 2 days back, 10 days on the trip. Um, and there are many of these sort of like adventures that you can do when you travel that I think really are impressive. Um, and they change your life. And I highly recommend doing something like that when you're traveling.
And just to drill into that a little bit, like what are the characteristics of something like that that are that much different? Is it the isolation? Is it how would you categorize those?
Yeah. DJ, I just want to say, like, the way you ask questions and the depth of how you're thinking about this is so great that I'm sure anyone who takes your course is going to get value out of it. Like, this is going to be an incredibly foundational experience to your sabbatical, or it's going to help you learn more about whatever future sabbatical you end up doing. So, I highly recommend it. Um, for me, the I have like ADHD, and I forgot your question again. It was
Like, yeah, what are the characteristics of these like really formative experiences? So you have
oh
you
yeah,
have
yeah, the
Amazon, you
trips.
have Antarctica.
One is going to a place that's really foreign from what you're used to. So living with indigenous tribes in the Amazon is about as foreign as it gets from my suburban life in Oakland, California. Antarctica, living in a place where nobody lives full time, is also another example. Um, the second thing is uh, I like the idea of there being no internet or no connectivity to the real world. I think that's really valuable. Some people go on meditation retreats and other versions of this. I'm fine with whatever. I don't have any opinion on what you decide to do. Long hikes, hiking Kilimanjaro, which is like a multi-day hike or something like that. Doing a bicycling trip, or you did a 6 weeks walking journey. I think any of these things work, but the core idea is that you're spending time outside of your comfort zone in areas where you are, you know, uh, where you're really getting an experience that's different from what you would be able to do if you were working. Because you could never work. I mean, at least for me, I can't take 10 days off and just go off the grid. That's very, very hard. Um, but I could when I was on sabbatical.
Okay, couple more questions. So one, I want to talk about kind of reintegrating back into life and how you kind of discerned those different career moves, and then I want to talk a little bit about the course and kind of what you would have wished you would have gotten as you were setting out. So as you were choosing between, you mentioned like politics or the different type of ideas when you're coming back, ed tech. How did you go about deciding which ones were for you and which ones worked next?
Yeah, great question. I spent my way of making most decisions is immersion. So I literally just tried them. So when I was thinking about politics, I went and tried to get a job in politics, and I met a bunch of people who were working in it. And I said, I'm thinking about doing this. And can you tell me what it's like? I watched a master class on from politics, which was actually kind of useful, but also kind of useless. Didn't teach me much, but it helped me understand why I would or would not like politics.
Hmm.
Um, I did and then when I was doing conservation, I went and visited sites all over Africa and sort of visited national parks. So one of my things is that when I'm trying to figure out what's next, I just immerse myself. When I decided to build Maven, I immersed myself in online courses and just took a lot of them, delivered a couple. That's like how I got here. In terms of reintegration, one of the most surprising things about going on sabbatical is how much harder it was to reintegrate than I expected. So
Hmm.
during my, multi-year time off, I would sometimes come back to the United States and like I'd have a wedding to go to, or I'd have to come back to for a doctor's appointment or some legal thing or whatever. And I felt so awkward and so out of place. Like I remember just simply landing in LA and getting on a lift and from the airport and talking to someone and just feeling like, wow, I used to have a great time talking to Lyft drivers. And now I have no idea. And I love talking to taxi drivers all over the world, Uber drivers, etc. I had no idea how to talk to this person. Like I did not know how to answer any of their questions. All my answers were weird. Where do you live? Haven't lived anywhere in 18 months. What do you do? I'm just taking time off. Oh, have you watched the game or how's the weather been? I just came from Peru. Like what the hell? Like everything didn't make sense. And then the types of things that people think about on a day-to-day basis are different. Your energy level is different. So reintegration is a real thing. And I reintegrated by slowly, I gave myself a fair amount of time and I had a lot of reintegration. I took, almost 6 months of this like shoulder period during which I was kind of working and then I kind of took a lot of time off. So still on vacations, but I wasn't really on sabbatical anymore. Or at least the depths of the sabbatical that I told you guys about today. Then from there, I spent a year where I was working, but slowly ramping up. It was really hard to get back into a schedule. Like I had not had a schedule in so long. I had nothing on my calendar. And now all of a sudden I had to like show up at 2:00 for some meeting, like on Zoom. Like, what the hell? This is all super weird to me. So I slowly integrated myself. One of the things that I really liked is that I started with consulting on the way back. So after my first, my sabbatical after Udemy, and then my sabbatical after, Sprig, after both of these, when I got back and reintegrated, I didn't just jump into a full-time job right away. I went and did some consulting so that I had a reintegration period during which I was working a lot less hard than I would be in full-time work, but still able to make an income. So that was really helpful. Yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Cool. We got a question from Renica, who I interviewed. She took a sabbatical after all of her kids flew the coop. So kind of this empty
Yeah,
nest,
very
what do you
cool.
do next? So she asked, were you kind of expecting some revelation when you were, figuring out what to do next? And were you surprised that you came back to the field you'd already been in?
I was very surprised I came back to a field I'd already been in. I had no idea that that was going to happen. I would have told you probably until about 6 months before I started Maven that that was the last thing I was thinking. But it felt right, and I saw a really big change over that time that I had taken off from when we started Udemy, which was I left in 2012 to 2020 or 2019 when I was exploring Maven. So 7 years, there's a lot changed. And then in terms of revelation, I think one of the things that's really important is not to have a lot of expectations. I mean, DJ is going to do his best to assuage you of all of the like concerns you have and help you. He's much more practical than I am about actually like what you should do in a sabbatical and how to make it useful and blah, blah, blah. And like, I think that the real lesson though, and the true next level thing is to take everything he says and use it, because I actually did all of those things. So I got some of that advice over time and happen to know I met a bunch of people who had went on sabbatical before I went myself and got a bunch of advice. However, also to remember that the whole point of this is to lower your expectations and to not have expectations and just be present. So I did not expect any sort of revelation, but I got way more revelations than I expected.
And just last question from Capiche, who took a sabbatical, leaving Coursera, if I recall. Where in the sabbatical or reintegration journey did you start working on Maven? So you mentioned kind of like 18 months travel cut. At what point in time did you start working on Maven?
So it's 18 months of international travel. 6 months of semi-international travel where I was spending time between Austin, Boston, and the UK. And then 1 year during which I was between I was between the UK and Austin, and that 1 year was work. So I spent almost a full year of working without working, meaning that I was taking meetings, I was trying out projects, I started little course businesses, I consulted a little bit, I advised a little bit, I started investing a little bit. I was just doing stuff. I was doing work stuff. Um, Obviously, not everyone has that luxury, so I would say get a consulting job or get a job that's less intense and just work there for a couple months or a year. But that was I was luxury. I had the luxury of being able to do that, and so I did take a full year before I started working on Maven, and I gave myself a full year. So I had a requirement that it had to be a year. I wasn't willing to do it in 8 months. So even if I had figured out Maven, the idea in 8 months, I wouldn't have been I had a rule. I wasn't going to start until 12 months of reintegration.
Awesome. Cool. So in the last few minutes, I guess just want to talk a little bit about the course. Is there anything that you wish you would have known, or advice that you had heard, as you were talking to other folks when you're planning your sabbatical or executing it?
So I've done international travel, like long term, 4 times. Like once in high school, before going to high school, I went to India for 3 months. I went to Spain for 3 months after college. And then I spent about 3 months off in between after Udemy, and then almost 3 years after Spriggan before Maven. So like I've learned the hard way a bunch of lessons about how to be successful when you travel that I would have loved to have learned. Examples of things that I'm sure you'll talk about. It's like, I do think having some intention is useful. So I fell into the intentions because someone like asked me early on, and I like started writing them down a little bit in my Evernote, but I didn't really do it properly. I think having some intention is pretty useful. I think that knowing how to travel and actually like how to find locations and pick them is something that I learned really aggressively late, like over time. I just used to just go with whatever opportunity was in front of me. And I think most people naturally would. I think having other people to communicate with as you're on the journey so that you can resonate with it was really important. One of the best things that happened during my sabbatical is I ended up running into 2 people who had been on the road for almost 7 years. It's the longest time I've ever met people who live nomadically. And they weren't on sabbaticals. They were working during that 7 years, but they were living nomadically around the world for 7 years. And I could just relate so much to some of their things. Like someone told me once that you have a sort of like minor depression at 4 weeks, at 6 months, at a year and a half, and at 3 years. Like she'd been on 7 years, so she knew. And she was like, yeah, you're going to go through this. And so when I had those moments, I was like, oh, I know this is happening. Like, damn, this was really weird. I feel lonely. I feel I should just push through because Alex did it and she had an amazing time living abroad. So there are all these little things. And then of course, like having travel buddies. When I was in a place for a month, I would not have any travel buddies and no friends could visit me, because I think having a solo experience is really, really valuable and important. But when I was not in that mode and I was traveling, it's really nice to have friends when you're traveling and doing things like visiting Japan. I've visited every time. I've never been to Japan alone. Why? Because like, who cares? I mean, I don't need to go to Japan alone. I don't need to go to every place alone. I can do some of them with other people and it's fun and enjoyable. I went on my trip to the Amazon with friends, which was really nice. And then there were other trips I went on alone as well, which is great. But I think it's nice to have them. There's a bunch of details, access-wise, of things that you figure out while you're traveling that if you learn them in advance, it'll just make your life a little bit easier, a lot easier, honestly, and increase the ROI of your time spent.
Cool. Yeah, the plan is course launches November 15th. We'll do just about weekly gatherings with a community of folks. So you're getting this, you talked about community and having folks along the journey, but getting to have your own kind of independent space. So I think that's one thing that allows is you see these other folks that are on the same journey, but very different journeys. And you kind of get to see them at the beginning and maybe reunite at the end. And We've got coaches, so to help folks think about, anywhere from, are you planning on taking time off up through the next year? How do you talk to your employers about it? How do you think about budgeting? To navigating those bumpy things in the middle you talked about. I mean, one of the things I thought was super difficult was, how do you convince folks that you're not just always having the time of your life when you're off? I mean, it's hard work. It can bring up a lot of stuff that you've been kind of shoving under the surface for a while. So, yeah, totally wish we would have gotten a chance to speak beforehand, but it sounds like you've figured it out somewhat the hard way.
I totally did. Thanks, TJ. And yeah, I hope y'all get a chance to check out his course. I mean, I'm pretty excited that he's doing this, and I hope we all support him.
Cool. Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll have the link up to the broadcast and the recording in just a bit. Have a good one.
Great.